very much, Abraham, for being there through many crazy challenges that became gifts like we talked about before. It's been lovely. I want to talk about end-of-life options and choices for people that are terminally ill, but specifically...
That's 100% of you. Didn't anyone tell you?
And I've listened to as many of the teachings that I could find from you that dealt with this, because my mother had Lewy body dementia, and she had in her directive since 1993 that she wanted my sister and me to help her when she could no longer make certain choices. And so it was a lot to put. I knew that from what I had listened to from you about this subject, about it not being somebody else's assignment. And so I prolonged that decision until it came to fruition, and I didn't have to worry about, going to jail and the things that were kind of making me crazy and not making me feel good. I changed it to, you know what, I'm going to let this transpire in the right way.
Before you go any further, we want to stick some stuff in here.
Please.
And a sort of carryover from what we were just talking about path of least resistance. And is there a better topic to discuss path of least resistance than this subject of someone making their transition? When you think in terms of your inner being and your inner being calling you, don't you want to have gotten out ahead of it by having conversations like those that we've been having this week, understanding your relationship with your inner being so that you can feel the calling? In other words, everything is supposed to be fun, especially that.
Absolutely. And I thought, I agree, and my mother agreed. And my mother said she purposely didn't have a long-term care insurance because she never wanted to be cared for the long term if she wasn't having fun. And so the beautiful hospice doctors that approved her being one of the first, if not the first, dementia people, I don't know how to say it in a respectful way, to be able to, in a skilled nursing facility in California, cease having food or drink. And so she did that for 12 days and clenched her teeth and decided for sure she didn't want to have food or drink. But the hospice doctor agreed to this because he said, I really feel that you could help with, making this more easy for people to feel about transitioning. And so I've recorded my mom for 18 months because I couldn't find anything online for people to feel okay about it. So my mom and I spent all of the pandemic talking about how things were going to be when she transitioned and how we were going to communicate with owls and different things. And it was so lovely to be able to have these discussions and not have the insight of all my friends because they were all COVID freaking out on their own stuff, and we were just chilling, kind of writing a script for the next transition. And I do feel that I want to live up to my promise that I would like to inspire people to have these sort of discussions and not be as afraid of it, but I also wanted to ask about it not being my assignment necessarily. I'm not trying to tell people, oh, you should all want to die when you don't feel like it.
One of the most important things to consider about this topic. So first we want to say that if someone has not been a deliberate creator or a deliberate trender about most things in their life, as most people are not, then it's a big order to expect them to be a deliberate creator or a deliberate trender about this thing that they've had more resistance about than all other things put together. And so the point that you want to get across, if you're wanting to be of advantage to people, is that this is not something to fear, but just saying that it's not something to fear doesn't make it's something that people don't fear. So then when you think about the death experience, most people, because they've trended in opposition to the idea of it for so long, because they think of endedness, which there isn't any. They think of ceasing to be, which is certainly not the way that it is. So if you are interacting with people that have those strong trends, there really is not much that you can say that is going to make any difference to them. The good news is that their inner being, just like we were talking about earlier, understands where they are in relationship to where they want to be and is calling them. So if you are helping someone to relax and listen, to relax and trust, and it actually is an easier thing than your mother let it be.
The long goodbye, you mean?
Yes.
20 years?
It's a much easier thing than most anybody lets it be, because once you are no longer romping and enjoying the physical, then the other part is calling in a stronger way.
I've always been curious how, when Louise Hay, for example, talked about, I think even in the 90s, that her plan was to die in her sleep in her 90s. I'm saying in the 1990s, and then she did that. Do we get to kind of make those decisions with ourselves? And I guess that's something that we manifest.
You do. Of course you do. But there's a bigger thing that we want to emphasize here. And that is that the path of least resistance is something that keeps evolving for each one of you. So it's all right if you didn't come to terms with it before the moment that you made your transition. There's no right or wrong way to do this. Some years ago, when Esther and Jerry were traveling less, they were flying nearly every weekend, but Esther was doing telephone consultations, setting time aside, and several people every day were having a chat with Abraham on the telephone. And a woman called frequently. She was a therapist in New York, and she always called every month, and she had 2 back-to-back conversations with a 15-minute segment of refreshment in between. So in her first conversation, she is explaining about her father, who is making his transition, but he's taking way too long. And he's tired of it. Everyone around him is tired of it. She went down the list of all the reasons why this was just taking too long. And she wanted to know, her question was, what am I doing wrong? Because she was helping a lot of people with a lot of things. What am I doing wrong? And we said to her, nothing is wrong. This is unfolding exactly right. This is the exact unfolding, given the resistance and the path of most allowance. There is nothing wrong with how this is unfolding. It is exactly right. And her father made his transition in that moment. In that moment. So she took her segment of refreshment. During the segment of refreshment, received a phone call, and then came back to explain to Esther, before Esther brought Abraham in, that her father had made his transition. So now she is wanting to talk to us about what made the difference.
Her resistance letting
Her
go.
resistance went away. And that is the biggest factor. When you think about it, with most people have been calibrating to the people around them more than they've been calibrating to their inner being who is now calling them. So you're not going to be able, all of a sudden, to get someone to stop calibrating to the humans around them and start listening for non-physical. It's not likely that it's going to happen at that stage.
I had to leave finally the room for her to transition.
Yes, you made it easier for her.
And I said, listen, I feel like you're hanging on for me, and please don't.
That's a very common thing.
Yeah.
It's the most common thing. When we were all out of the room, and most families are very mad about that because they didn't think it should happen like that, but it's almost always the way that it happens.
Yes, and I just, it was a beautiful experience with a lot of beautiful nurses that were helping us, and recorded
But releasing resistance is always a wonderful thing.
It is.
And we know you're all sick of talking about the death experience. It's all right. But if you could start looking at the death experience as just extended life experience. And so the people that you are helping are the people that are hanging on, the people that are fretting over it. The people that are in the process of making their transition, they don't need any help. They've got non-physical helping them. They're on the way. They're just having the experience that they're having, and people are unnecessarily suffering all around them.
Yeah, and so you've helped me and many others that were around me through this process, because I really was my mom and I had fun with the whole weird thing. Because it is, and wanted to highlight that there is fun to be had, even in the most ridiculous things. She called me honey. She thought I was her caregiver. She would talk about how honey sucked to carry sometimes, which is me. And I was like, oh my God, why didn't you like honey last night? She was really nice. She's like, well, she wasn't that helpful. And I'm like, well, maybe honey had a bad day, Mom. But it was just really a funny experience, and I don't think that many people, everybody felt so sorry for me, and I was like, well, I'm really fine with it, until I was ready to let go. So thank you.